Welcome. It's Thursday night. It's 8 p.m. Central. It's what the cool kids are calling ASTV. It's the Thursday night podcast for the American Scouser TV. It's just two of us tonight. We have what we call in the trade a substitution. You lose Mane or you lose Firmino. We sub in a player. We've got the equivalent of Mohamed Salah joining us tonight to sub in for the lads. It's Gally. How are you, Gally?
I don't know, man. Right now, Mohamed Salah has got 5 shots on goal in 4 matches, so I don't know if that's exactly what you're looking for. But I will sub
say
in
5 things tonight. I'm gonna be good.
most likely, I'm probably more along the lines of the Iago Aspas substitution that no Liverpool supporter wanted to hear about or think about. But I thought there was a great adage that if Liverpool were to be awarded the 13-14 title, would we finally forgive Aspas for the corner? And my answer to Kazi is no.
No.
There's no forgiving for that corner.
Yep, that was a clutching defeat from the jaws of defeat with that corner. Not to be forgiven. So it's good to have you tonight, Gally. We're going to talk about a few things tonight. And then for anybody who's watching, make sure you stick around because we have the fantasy show after, I believe. If you're as bad at fantasy football, fantasy Premier League as I am, you probably want to stick around for that and get some hints and tips from the boys who know. But tonight we're going to talk about a good few things, namely to start off with, Gally. I thought that ran through my head pretty much all week since the press conferences of last weekend and the demeanor of Jurgen Klopp. And the question is Jurgen Klopp, for once, under genuine pressure? Dum.
All right. So my reply or response to that is I think he's under pressure to make changes and to deliver on some results. I don't believe these owners are going to sack Jurgen Klopp. I really don't. I just don't see a world that while they're trying to sell the club especially, they would diminish its value. I think the new owner gets that right more than anyone. And I've been saying to everyone, I question whether or not everyone was saying, oh, you need Klopp here so the new owner knows what they're buying. I keep coming back to anything in my history of sports, when new ownership comes in, it's usually a new sporting director, in American sports, we'd call it a general manager, right? It's a new leader of sport, and it's usually a new voice, their person, their guy, their girl, whatever you want to call it. Do I think that would automatically happen with Klopp? I don't, but I think Klopp has 4 or 5 months to show that he has some of the answers to this test. Because as of this moment, I don't think he's shown a willingness to deviate from his plan. And I think that is going to leave him with a much hotter seat come the summer, if that makes sense.
Do you think as well, in terms of if new ownership comes in, that it might, number one, freshen him up a bit? Because we're going to assume that if we get new owners or even a substantial investment into the club, that he'll finally be able to buy players that he wants rather than the B, C, or D options on the list for cut prices. And maybe that, freshens him up or gets him to reevaluate how he wants gegenpress to go and get the players who can do that. Or do you think that, as you say, the new ownership will look and say, he didn't do well in the last 5 months, we'll give him till Christmas, and if he hasn't shaken things up, he's gone?
Yeah, I think they give him at least the first half of the season on his resume and his merit and what he's brought to the club and where he brought us to, which is the heights that we hadn't seen. I mean, he delivered the Premier League title, right? He delivered what he promised in that first press conference he had. Now, he told us if we're sitting up here and we've only won 1 Premier League title in the next 5 years, it will be a failure. And then he realized, shit, I got to compete with City. That's really goddamn hard. And he's come so close so many times before. I take a step back a little bit with the idea that he hasn't had money to buy players he wants. I mean, they were in on Tchouaméni. He couldn't convince Tchouaméni to come. I mean, the kid went to Madrid. they were in on some big players. He was a big part of bringing in Nunez, whether he'll admit it or not now. He's also a big part of Nunez at Wolves going to Wolves and not coming to us for $28 million. And now he's literally, right outside of the Premier League team of the season, playing for a poor side, really bossing their midfield. He also had opportunities to buy other players and turned them down, and then stood at the podium and told everyone that he had enough reinforcements and he didn't want players. Then 2 weeks later told us he made a mistake because his players are injured. And we're going to get to the injuries and where they come from. So I think the idea that he hasn't been able to buy players is kind of an easy way to point the blame at not by you, but by most supporters, is an easy way to point the blame at the owners and not put any blame on him. And for me, he's overseen the Fabinho dive. He's overseen and played Jordan Henderson almost into the ground. So he also got players like Calvin Ramsey, who he wouldn't let go out on loan in January, but won't put in a match day squad. So, I struggle with the fact he hasn't been able to buy players is his problem. I think he is too in love with his players to replace them.
In terms of, I always, when I talk about these kind of things, just to keep the running joke going for Alan Walnut about not bashing Brendan Rodgers, but I'll go in a different direction. Brian Clough, for all the opinions Liverpool have on Brian Clough, and rightfully so after Hillsborough, he was a genius manager. But he was a genius manager because he had a genius assistant manager who could spot a play a mile off and see something that nobody else was seeing. And once that partnership broke up, Brian Clough was lost as Nottingham Forest manager. They were always thereabouts, but eventually ended in failure for them, really, because they got relegated. Is it possible that Klopp is getting too much say in the transfers, and it's really not his strength in terms of knowing which players, as you say, to pick up and which players to put down? Because if he is turning away these good players and then backtracking on those decisions, it really doesn't give a confidence in his judgment in that arena, does it?
Yeah, I think he does. I think that's been a subtle change, maybe since Michael Edwards stepped down a year ago, and then Aiden Ward took over the job. It seemed like he was doing well. It's funny, everyone's all excited. Oh, Ward's gone now. He couldn't work with Klopp, and it's too big a job for him. Look at what he did. Everyone thought he was brilliant when he beat United to Darwin Nunez in the summertime, right? And then the guy misses, one out of every 3 opportunities he gets, and then the other times he looks like he's kind of a little bit lost and chaotic. To me, that article that came out by Melissa Reddy and the folks at the Times, where they really dug into the backroom staff and some of the issues and the rot that was happening at the club, and how some were getting kind of tired on the side of the club with regards to Pep specifically, and in some ways Jurgen. And I feel like as Pep Linder's role has risen at the club, we've actually seen a decrease in like the overall cohesion of the back room. So it used to feel like Klopp was locked in with owners, locked in with his scouting team, with his directors. And it feels now like as he's gotten more power, he's pushed some people into corners to basically, to a lesser extent, like to take the bullets for him. And I think that's why we're seeing so many people leave the club, is that there's genuine unrest behind the scenes. And he's so jovial and he's so wonderful in the presser, and everybody loves the Klopp hugs and the fist pumps to the crowd. But I just feel like that has to wear on people eventually, because to a man, everyone has always described him as the nicest, most jovial guy, but they also recognize that behind the scenes, he's maniacal. And I have to imagine he's angry, and he's angry at how things are going. And I don't know that that makes for a great working environment with his coworkers. And I think that's why they're looking for opportunities elsewhere.
In terms of Pep Linders, because when his book came out pre-season, I think it was, if I remember the time frame correctly, there was a lot of, he's giving the secrets away, and the the book is going to come back to bite because everybody's going to know what we do. And anybody who spent any time like doing their coaching badges will know there's no secrets under the sun in terms of coach, and everybody knows everybody.
Right.
Or there's methods. It's standard. It's the same in the NFL, I'm sure, and it's the same in NBA. Everybody knows how everybody else is training because we have transfers for a start, and everybody's going to say, "So what did that coach you just played for? What did he do for training, etc." But on the other hand, I do know, just because I read about Pep Linders when he was at PSV Eindhoven as a youth coach, he was making his name. He does a lot of drills that don't have any opposition, which is kind of a big thing in coaching, because if you don't have opposition, you don't have game pressure, so to speak. You know, things don't work out the way they're supposed to work out in the game because nobody's trying to take the ball from you. If he is getting more control of the training and more say in the type of player, and maybe given the fitness of the players and that kind of tension that seems to be there, maybe more say in how the fitness drills go, and maybe as a Dutch coach, less of them, because Dutch coaches are always about less fitness, more ball work. Is it possible that his influence on the training ground is actually a huge factor in how we're performing this year?
I mean, if anyone who's watched them play this year could tell you, it makes a lot of sense to what you're saying, that they're training without any defense, without any opposition. Because at times they're defending without opposition, right? Like, I mean, I feel like we're going to concede every single time we give up a set piece. Every single time. And what do? We give up more cheeky set pieces. And I think with Pep specifically, no one, in my opinion, no one's has fallen further at Liverpool Football Club this season than Pep Linders. I think last year in the middle of the summer, we all to a man, and we were here, you know, we were talking about it in our little pre-show, right? I was destroying and ruining all of the Aston Villa's fans with all of my opinions in the preseason during our FPL shows, because I wasn't really a big supporter of Gerrard as manager. I didn't think he was going to have a great year with them. It got proven to be correct. I also told them that if you hired a professional manager who had skills, you would find yourselves rapidly moving up the table, and Unai Emery has them a point behind Liverpool. And when Gerrard was fired, they were 2 points ahead of relegation. So to me, that the kind of the proof's in the pudding there. And I think that at that time, I was one of the ones screaming like, well, if Klopp leaves, then you give Pep the job. It's continual. It creates the same cycle. It's the same process. The training techniques they have are being administered all the way down to the youth team levels. Now, I hate to say it, I looked some things up the other day. Do you know what? We have more injured youth players than any other side in the Premier League. Like, everyone's a sick note at this club because everyone practices like this. Everyone plays like this. And I don't know in 2023 that this is a feasible model any longer. Like, I don't know the gegenpressing actually can continue to work. When you look around Europe, who is the top side? And I mean top side that's doing this today.
I can't think of any. I would have only thought of Leeds, like with Bielsa, but that was like extreme gegenpressing, and it failed because the players couldn't run anymore, and they were only with him for what, 2-3 seasons, and they were already broken.
And let's be honest, they didn't buy at the same level of player that we were buying when they were buying players, but they brought in a lot more bodies between both the year they almost got promoted and they lost in the playoff. Then the year that they got promoted, their first year in the league, they were a revelation, and I think it works for a year, right? I mean, this guy, Bielsa, was having triple sessions with a small squad.
Yeah.
This August, knowing they had a World Cup in the middle of the season and guys had played 2 extra months. Like, it was almost a writing on the wall, but I do believe that like Klopp and managers like Bielsa, who are kind of caught from the same cloth, that it's my way. This is the only way. And I just feel like we're in a period of football where adaptability is important. And like understanding players and understanding the physical demands and the sports science. And I just feel like maybe the combination of sports science, analytics, and the way Klopp plays, I don't know that I don't know that that is an actual story that still jives.
I think in terms of like, one phrase that we could probably have applied to Liverpool over the last few years would be joined up thinking, that everybody at the club knew exactly what they were doing. The staff, the different departments were all linked to each other. But I want to pick up on something you said last August. So this is how far back I remember you saying it, that the club were getting the game, but because they were employing people like the throwing coach to look for marginal gains, because that's where the game is going to be won and lost. And you were correct, of course, as always. But we don't seem to have adapted, as you say, to the trends of soccer. And there's always a trend. It's almost to be haughty about it. It's almost Hegelian in its dialectic. You have gegenpressing will be the thing, and then somebody will find a solution to gegenpressing, and then that becomes the new way of playing till somebody finds a solution to that way of playing, and then it goes back. It always kind of seems to rotate and oscillate between two things. Teams are now becoming a lot quicker with their first passes out from the defense, so it doesn't allow gegenpressing teams and counter-pressing teams to do their job, and it stuns them. It stuns us. It stunned Leeds. Suddenly, after throwing 3, 4, 5, 6 players at the player with the ball, they now have to track back and watch it go over their heads or watch it go between the spaces. If we were looking for marginal gains there, do you think it's a massive failure on the part of the analysts, maybe, for not seeing it, or Klopp for not listening to the analysts, if they did, that we haven't seen that new trend in soccer?
Yeah, I would say if there's one thing that's really disappointed me is that we feel as a club right now like we're stuck in between what we want to be and what we are. And what we are is an aging side that probably shouldn't be playing with as high of a line as we do. I mean, we've literally basically just eviscerated Trent Alexander-Arnold, who might be our most talented overall footballer. We've just eviscerated his overall confidence by refusing to change our tactics to support him defensively. So we allow rank and file people and, all the, pundits and reporters and writers over in England to rip on him and talk about all the troubles he's had. He had a tough year. We've done nothing to actually support him. The fact that Virgil and Konate have played 156 minutes of total football together or something is just an asinine stat. Like, our two best center backs, we still play with this crazy high line. We can't defend right now, whether it's Gomez or Matip, right, without Van Dijk. So you'd almost think, change your tactics, drop the high line, maybe play Nat Phillips, because honestly, other than Van Dijk, defensively, he's probably your best actual on-ball defender that you have other than Van Dijk, right, with Konate out. But we don't alter any of that. We just keep bombing guys forward, and then the answer is, every once in a while to yank Trent when he's not playing well and drop Milner in the pitch. And we think like that is a move that's going to actually help us. Our midfield struggled all year, which has led to us not scoring goals. And then the tactics we're playing up top do nothing to put our best goal scorers in position to score goals. It feels almost like either Klopp has literally completely lost it, which I don't believe is the case, or he's so determined to prove that his guys still have it that they can just play themselves into form. But it's February 9th. And we haven't played a good football match all season outside of beating Bournemouth 9-0. And let's be real, they belong in the championship and they'll probably find themselves there by next season. So it's one match. And if it isn't for that, we're being outscored by the poorest of competition. We can't score goals. We can't stop others from scoring in the first 5 minutes. And our midfield looks a shambles. Yet everyone wants to point the finger at the ownership. And I'm sorry, we still put out a first 11 that is better than our competitors 4 out of every 5 matches. That has to, and I know you've said this before, and I'm one of the few that are with you now. That has to come down to what's happening on the training pitch, right? You're a coach. Isn't it on the coach if you have better players and you can't get results?
I mean, to me, it seems we mentioned this last week. We talked about Brendan Rodgers in that 14-15 season. Decimated forward line. Suarez sold, Sturridge injured, couldn't buy a goal, and we couldn't stop conceding them. And as much as we might mock his character and his insane things that he says in the press, he did earnestly try to fix the problem and happened upon that 3-4-1-2 solution where he put Lallana in the 10 role and had Sterling up front. But which suddenly got the best out of Emre Can as the right outside centre back. It suddenly gave us a solidity that Dejan Lovren was lacking, and we had Sacco suddenly playing well. And the idea of because what you're saying about Trent Alexander-Arnold, it just seems that if he switched to a 3-back system before they all start getting injured, eliminated one of the midfielders and let Robertson and Alexander-Arnold just be pure wing backs, not have to worry about tracking back so much, it might get them, that freedom that they had played with in previous seasons. But that idea, he seems so married to that 4-3-3 that he won't even consider sticking with the 4-4-2 that looked so good for us. That as you say, he just seems determined to play those players into form, which the agree may not be the last game of the season when we've nothing to play for.
Yeah, I mean, he made all the comments. I think there was a great comment one time. Someone asked him about going to 3 at the back, and he was like, never, don't ask, not ever. Like, he basically was like, I don't believe in it. I think, 3 in wing backs makes no sense. And I think to myself, like, with this side, it makes all the sense in the world. But it also makes sense to play with, you mentioned Brendan Rodgers playing with Lallana in the 10 hole. It makes sense if you go out and buy and you groom a young player like Harvey Elliott, and you buy a player like Carvalho, and then you bring in a player like Gakpo and refuse to play him on the left where he's comfortable, and you want to play him through the center, well, then play him off another striker where he can actually benefit. Yet the man has always felt like the number 10 was like a dead position in football. Like there isn't a spot for a creative, attack-minded midfielder in a Jurgen Klopp system. And yet they buy Keita for a record fee, never play him, in my opinion, in a position that actually suits his strengths or his talents. They go out and buy a luxury player like Thiago coming off the title-winning season when we needed to actually buy a industrious midfielder to replace Gini. Like, there are all these moves that just didn't make sense. And I don't know if it's a disconnection between the club or they just wanted to keep Klopp happy because they were so afraid that if he left, it would all end. But in some ways, I'm afraid, like, by giving him all this power, you just allow him to stay. And it ends anyways, right? There's that old adage in business, right? Like, I'd train my employees, right? But, like, what if I spend all this money on training and they leave? And the smart CEO in the world thinks to themselves, like, what if we don't train them and they fucking stay?
Yeah.
Like, and I feel like that's where we are, though. I feel like the club is at a point of we did everything to make sure Jurgen knew he had a job for life and he would be the mayor of Liverpool for life and have keys to the city. And he's going to, right? Do you think the guy's ever going to pay for a drink in that city or, pay for any of his thousands of dollars of freaking enamel and teeth work he has done every single year? No. Them whitening opportunities are coming with a full endorsement. But at the end of the day, I really hope he turns it around in the next 6 months, next year and a half, Because I think if he leaves us at a point where we're completely rebuilding the way Dortmund had to rebuild when he left, it will be impossible to look back at this time and think it was a 100% success. Because the whole point of the third contract was he wanted, for the first time in his career, to see a project through to the second phase. And it scares me that we made the mistake of thinking he could. Because 2 other clubs were smart enough to know there was someone else that was going to get that job done. Because it's heavy lifting, I think, to clean up a Jurgen Klopp side when they run out of juice. And it's unfortunate, but I kind of feel like we've seen the wheels fall off and the juice run dry.
A little bit of time to mix the metaphors for Klopp, maybe to make a pit stop, get some new wheels, and maybe put some Formula 12 or 1.5, whatever the best formula is. And we could talk about this one forever, but I want to talk tonight as well about another manager who was under pressure and unfortunately succumbed to the pressure. The Imperial Jesse Marsch, fired by Leeds. I liked Jesse Marsch. I thought he was a likable guy, not in the Ted Lasso vein that some press types and internet type paint him as, but you could see what he was trying to do. But yet again, another manager who was maybe over planning for the players he actually had than players he did. Was he hard done by? Was he rightfully fired? And more importantly, given how short a time Bob Bradley had at Swansea, was this the death knell for American coaches in the Premier League?
Yeah, I'm worried about that. I'll answer the latter question first. I think it is the death nail for American coaches in the Premier League as far as being either head coaches or like full-time managers at clubs. I think Jesse Marsch gets a lot of unfair stick, especially, and I know you weren't doing it, but like the Ted Lasso comments and stuff, it's completely unfair. The man has actually managed at a really high level in all different areas of the world. He has titles. Like, I don't care if it's Austria. He won a league title in Europe and almost got Salzburg out of a group that had Liverpool in it. Like, he was very, very good at Salzburg. I actually think Leipzig is where he got done hard because everyone was hurt and it was just a terrible period and they moved on from him. And I felt like he was doing really good things with that Leipzig side. At Leeds, I got to be honest, it's Leeds. Do I think he was a little hard done by? I do. If you're going to let a guy go out and sign 2 players in January, don't you give him till February 15th? You give him till like the end of February at least to see if McKennie beds in, see if Sinestri comes back. He's never had Bamford the entire time, that he's been there. He's never had a healthy Bamford. He is the guy who promoted Nanto to the starting lineup and took him out of. That's an 18-year-old Italian kid who he bedded in. I personally think Tyler Adams, and I'm not a big Tyler Adams fan. Just his personality irks me. I think it's probably because he's American and I hate Americans. But I don't hate Americans, actually. I should correct that. I hate the American men's national team. But I feel like they were building something. They were improving on Jesse Marsch. So it doesn't make sense to me. Where I do understand it, though, is that I think they feel like they're right on the cusp of falling into that relegation area. And I honestly think that the hiring of Sean Dyche at Everton sent ripples around everyone in that area. Because I think everyone honestly thought that Everton would just cut their losses and probably stick with Lampard long enough that Everton was going down. And I think as soon as Sean Dyche shows up, like they're going to put in the fight to at least give it a full out go to stay up. And then when they get a result like they did against, Arsenal on the weekend, I think that had a little bit to do with it, honestly. And when you see that new manager bounce, right, it automatically makes owners think like, I can do that. I just got to fire this guy in skinny jeans.
What did you think of Bamford's comments last week, where he kind of gave away the family silver a little bit, criticised Marsh for his tactics? It clearly showed that there was, number one, attention in there, that maybe it was just Bamford, or maybe it was just half the team, or maybe it was the full team. It didn't seem like the full team didn't want to play for Jesse Marsh, but maybe elements of it did. Let's say Bielsa-ists, for want of a better term. But also, do you think that comments like that speak to maybe Jesse Marsh being a little bit laissez-faire with his discipline with the players? Maybe treating them too much like adults. When we've seen time and time again from pretty much all professional players, except for James Milner and Jordan Henderson, it seems, that they're pretty much idiots. A lot of the time, they're young people who didn't go to college, didn't finish high school, and get a ton of money very, very quickly. And then, if you're Mario Balotelli, spend it all on trampolines. They're not the brightest bunch. But do you think there was issues there between some of the players and Jesse Marsh? Was he maybe a little bit too soft on them when they probably needed at the iron rod of discipline, as Graham Souness might say?
First off, before we jump off of the Balotelli comment, are you saying that lighting off Roman candles in your kitchen on a random Saturday night is not a smart decision?
It depends how drunk you are.
For the landlord, it's definitely not. For Balotelli and his friends, it was probably the most fun they had on any random Tuesday night, right? The guy was lighting off Roman candles in his own kitchen in Manchester, like lighting shit on fire. And I can just think to myself, like, I do look back at that time with Brendan Rodgers, and I think to myself, like, we all should have known he was done when they signed Mario Balotelli for him on deadline day, and that poor guy had to go to the podium and act like he was excited about it. But, I digress from there, because all we need to do on this podcast to send Alan into a full-out tizzy is give any reason why Brendan Rodgers shouldn't have been fired. He'll think that someone took over your body and mind and spirit. I think Jesse Marsh is too much a player's manager. And I think that's what's probably hurt him a little bit in Europe. And I also think that, the whole Leeds United States of America and all the little jokes that they had because he signed Tyler Adams and they already had Aronson. But here's the thing. Tyler Adams won't be at Leeds much longer. He'll be at a much bigger club playing a big role. Brendan Aronson isn't going to be at Leeds much longer. They've been successes. And Weston McKennie has looked good in his few appearances, right? Well played, Alan. Well played.
Good man, Alan.
But they definitely, I think the biggest problem is that Leeds does what Leeds does. They kept going out and buying him attack-minded players and replaced Rafinha with Sinisterra. Looks like a good player. Promote Somerville. Looks like a good player. Gets the Nanto kid to play. It's getting. I would argue he got more out of Rodrigo in 4 months than Bielsa did in the year and a half since he became their record signing, right? Why didn't they buy him a goddamn center back? Why didn't they go out and get him Craig Dawson to make sure they actually stayed up? Why didn't they find him like a defensive defender? And maybe that's him, or maybe that's just Leeds ownership and operations operating the way Leeds wants to do. They just wanted to beat teams 4-3. It's almost like they hired Marsh to not be Bielsa and then forced his hand to play like Bielsa. And it just didn't feel like they ever had an identity. And I just feel like he was doomed to start. And it's too bad, because I actually think Jesse Marsh has more to do in Europe. Like, I think he is a European manager. And I don't think the fact that he's American should stop him from getting another job when Alan Pardew got 5.
In terms of just the American managers as it is, I like Bob Bradley as a coach. I think he's a good field coach. He's a good clinician, as they would say. But yeah, that's exactly right. But he had zero personality or charisma. That was his problem. He was very like, it was like the teacher in Ferris Bueller. Anybody, corner kicks, anybody. Whereas Jesse Marsh had I think he has genuine charisma. I think that's where more than his nationality, that's where the Ted Lasso stuff probably came from, because he was very positive. He was an upbeat kind of guy, and you could see players wanting to play for him. And as much as the first question was, the first part of the questions was the end of American coaches, if he was to get a job in the Premier League, where would you see him go? Which club? I'm thinking Southampton he could do with Jesse Marsh, but Arsenal couldn't. He's not that level right now. They're not going to look at him. We wouldn't look at him, but there is a club there for him, isn't there?
I think there is. I think you hit a good chord with Southampton. I think he's going to have to drop into the Championship and bring a club up. I think that's how he rebuilds himself if he wants to stay in England. I think he goes down. I mean, I know it's crazy, right? Like, goes to like a West Brom, goes to a club that has some history and success, but not anything big. And it'll probably be owned by an American set of owners, right? Like, give him 3 years, he'll be the manager of Wrexham in the Championship. But I could see him doing a job, and I could see him winning over a fan base. Brian Shelton actually just brought up Norwich. That is actually like a perfect type of club for him.
That's a young team as well, isn't it?
Yep.
That's a young.
Someone that needs a player
team,
like that. That wouldn't be a bad shout right there. In the Premier League, though, I will say I think you're right on with Southampton. The highest level I think he gets to is like a West Ham, maybe. Someone who like looked like they were on their way and is probably in need of an injection of love. Like, you don't need an old man curmudgeon like Moyes. They had that, right? When you fire a manager, you change to the opposite, which is why, like, I don't think Jose Mourinho will ever be the manager of Liverpool, people. Please don't at me and get mad. But like, when Klopp leaves, it's not going to be a guy who gives huge hugs on the sidelines. It's probably going to be a smack in the mouth.
It's going to be Rafa Benitez type. That's who we're going to have to replace him, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, except for it's not Rafa Benitez, and I don't want to hear that
it's
either.
Not Rafa Benitez.
Don't at me with that shit either. The game is far past him, because he hasn't succeeded basically, well, since he left Liverpool, to be totally honest. He had like a month and a half of good football at Napoli. And other than that, it has been a train wreck for that man. Yet he still gets jobs. And why? 2005.
2005. I mean,
it will never end, right? It will just never end. The guy is still living off of it. And I just feel like that's kind of Jesse Marsh's world. I think Jesse Marsh needs to find the right club. So he can't fail again. I do think it'll end up being in the Championship. Maybe he's a guy that goes to a place like Bournemouth. Maybe he goes to a club that gets dropped down that thinks they can come back up. For me, he did enough to prove that he can rally both supporters, a fan base, and players. And, I have a hard time taking Bamford. Is a guy who basically was dropped by Bielsa at the end. He had one great 35-game stretch where he scored a lot of goals. Other than that, the guy's been nothing but a rich kid with a silver spoon in his mouth, getting everything given to him, literally with butlers all his life. I mean, the people at Chelsea when he was a kid used to say you couldn't even talk to the guy because he wasn't on the same level as any player, because he was worth more money than the highest earners at Chelsea Football Club. His family is that rich. He didn't need to make a dollar playing football. And I think players like that are motivated by a lot of different things, and I just think that's where a guy like that probably doesn't help a manager like Jesse Marsh. Because I think Jesse Marsh needs like poor kids from the bad section of Manchester.
Hungry players.
Yes. And I don't know that Bamford's ever hungry.
Also, let's remember Bamford has probably been more of a sick note than Keita has been, or Oxlade-Chamberlain. So he really does have the silver spoon in his mouth, and probably other orifices as well. But let's move on for the triptych of our managership talk tonight. We play Everton on Monday, and they have Sean Dyche as their manager. I like Sean Dyche. I have to admit, I love coaches who get players to play the way they want the game to be played, whether I agree with that style or not. It's a very tough thing to do. But it's going to be a horrible game, isn't it? And really, that is probably the best signing they could have made this season.
Yeah, to be honest, let's be real. They should have hired Sean Dyche when they hired Frank Lampard.
Well, to be fair,
really,
they should have hired this pair of spectacles before they hired Frank Lampard. Let's be honest with that. He's dreadful.
Very fair point. If at any point these big clubs and small clubs, little clubs, huge clubs, whatever, if they could just stop hiring retread managers or ex-players that they think will be something that will sell tickets instead of managers who deserve jobs. I mean, there's no reason that Frank Lampard has managed 2 different clubs in the Premier League, let alone the fact that he managed a club like Chelsea. Like the idea that Chelsea thought that a player or a manager who was playing less than 5 years before was ready to manage at that level is just asinine. And it really speaks to, the love that England has for their own. I mean, Steven Gerrard, he went up to Rangers. He did an okay job. Rangers supporters will tell you they got better when he left. They won the league over Celtic, and they were happy when he left because the next year you watched it. They played better football, and they progressed all the way to the Europa League final. And that's not a shot at Steven Gerrard, people. I don't hate Steven Gerrard. He needed to manage for years at lower levels. He needed to learn the craft and learn the trade. Everything Gerrard did at Aston Villa was wrong. All things that someone like Sean Dyche would never do. You don't walk in and strip the captaincy from one of your players for making a mistake. It was absolutely asinine. He'd take guys out of the team. He'd put guys back in the team. There was no rhyme or reason. There was no merit based. And for me, Everton's biggest mistake was not hiring Sean Dyche on January 1st. Because had they hired Sean Dyche January 1st, he would have walked into the recruiting team's office and been like, go get me Chris Wood from Newcastle, and I'll guarantee we stay up. Because that's a guy who plays my way and handles my style. And I think Sean Dyche knows who he is and what he is. And I genuinely expect Everton to be comfortable come late April, early May. Because I genuinely do. I think they will find a way to survive. And I think Sean Dyche will be the reason they survive.
So on that note, how do you think Monday's game goes? Given our woes and their new manager bounce, plus an actual decent coach, do you see us experiencing any pain this Monday?
I genuinely don't. I think we're going to win this matchup. I think that at some point you got to score goals, right? At some point you just got to keep it going. I personally think it's like a 1-0, 2-0 match, and I think we get the win. I think we get all 3 points. 1999, last time Everton beat Liverpool at Anfield with supporters in the grounds. And I don't think that's breaking just because Sean Dyche showed up. Do I think they're going to be hard to break down? I do. I have concerns over who will start for us up top and how we will score goals. But the idea that Jota was back in full team training for 2 straight days makes me think he's going to be match fit to play. I don't think he'll start, but I think just having a player like that coming off the bench actually gives us a goal scorer and something that will change things. And I like that. So I'm going to go us 2-0. Maybe it's a Darwin early goal and then maybe a late Jota, absolute, classic Jota, pop up out of nowhere, score a goal you never saw coming. Something I think we've been missing more than anything else all season long. Random goals from Diego.
In terms of, they sold Gordon to Newcastle. It seems like that was a move that probably them more than benefits Newcastle. They seem. I watched that Everton Arsenal game. Like they seemed so much together in the space of whatever few hours Sean Dyche had them for training and team talks. And we have struggled to break teams down this season. Brian Shelton says it's going to be 0-0, and we can't score, neither can they. Although he does say that he hopes you're right, and I think we all hope you're right, Gally. But is this going to be one of those war of attrition, 0-0, 1-1s, 2-2 derby games?
I really hope not, because honestly, I really believe that this defense needs to respond. I know someone mentioned, I think it was Brian Shelton mentioned earlier, one of his comments about how criminal the third goal was. And I know I was harsh on Thiago a little earlier. I mean, he literally just watches Neves just run into the box. Like, there's just absolute no effort. Like, just two fucks to the world. Like, go ahead. This shit's over. We're done. Good night, the lights. That type of thing can't happen in this matchup because we will concede these awful weak goals. I think the biggest thing is we have to come out with some type of organization. I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud, but I actually expect James Milner to start at right back against Everton. I really do.
I think
part of me
that
really
would make
thinks,
sense.
I think there's part of me that really thinks Nat Phillips should start over Matip, to be honest, to just combat Dominic Calvert-Lewin and having the big point central forward. I don't know if he'll go that far, but Matip was so poor against Everton. Against Wolves in the midweek. And he's been poor for a long time now. I mean, it goes back to last season. And him and Gomez have never looked like a partnership to me. You know, I honestly think Kara, who drives me crazy, Jamie Carragher, sometimes with his punditry, but I thought he was spot on when he said, like, you don't judge a center back by how they play sitting next to Virgil van Dijk. You judge them when they have to play without him, and they have to be the organization. And what those two did against Wolves was just absolutely criminal. It was diabolically bad. They were poor. They made Robertson and Trent poor. And at times, they weren't even going forward because they knew they had to hang back. Like, we're playing Wolves, a team who can't score, and our fullbacks are afraid to go forward. Like, that's the state in which this club has gotten to. That and the fact that a 19-year-old who we still can't pronounce his name, nor do we know his name in the summer, is our best player for the last month and a half.
I think it's Bachishish. I just covered my mouth. Yeah, I just covered my mouth when I was saying it.
Just cover your mouth. Yeah, pretend like you're finished.
Pretend like I finished it. Just very quickly before we go, just on an Everton manager related threshold question, just a short one this week. If you had to choose the next manager of Liverpool between Sean Dyche or David Moyes, who would you choose?
Oh, motherfuck. You just asked me to throw up in my mouth and eat it.
That's why it's the threshold question.
So if I have no other options, right, I guess I can't pick Duncan Ferguson. And I wouldn't. I will. Oh God, this is so. My name's Sean Dyche, and I'm woke and livid. No, you know why it would be Sean Dyche? It's Sean Dyche because Sean Dyche is still connected to today's game at today's level, and I think he's connected to players, and I think players will play for him. As much as players love David Moyes is David Moyes, and we all know what he is and what he has. He'll get you real close, and then he'll finish just short and be just a good enough guy to have you bring him back another season. And Sean Dyche will kick somebody. He'll get angry. He'll start a fight in the dressing room if it means it. And I think he's probably the type of fire that they need. I don't want Sean Dyche to ever be the manager of Liverpool Football Club, obviously. And I know he won't ever be the manager of Liverpool Football Club because, well, he became the manager of Everton's football club, which is kind of great because it took him right off the active roster list of managers that can replace him. But I said it before, right? I expect the next manager to be that type of manager, maybe with a little bit more cachet. But it would have to be Dyche purely because he's proven that he still is connected to today's game. And I think what we're seeing in West Ham is letting us know that David Moyes is probably 1 year past the expiration date.
I would choose Dyche as well, simply because I could finally be a lookalike of a Premier League manager. And also, just to end on that note, is that your two descriptions of those managers there just a few minutes ago is exactly an exact description of my marriage. So, you know, nice insight into my life. And it just remains to say then, thank you all for listening, watching, joining in the comments. Make sure you like, subscribe, and join our Discord. Get more nonsense from us boys at American Scouser TV. Stick around for the BPL, EPL fantasy show, because if you're as bad as I am, you'll need the help. And we have the morning coffee, I believe, tomorrow, and then we will be back on Monday for the Monday night podcast, where we'll either be celebrating or throwing teacups at the wall. Just remains to say thank you, Gally, and stick around if you're a Gally fan or a Villa fan and you want to throw things at your monitor. And for me, we will see you next Thursday. It's peace out.